IFR success depends on preparation, and we're going to talk about how to get prepared for your next missed approach. You guys come along and check it out.
Hello fellow aviators, my name's Matt Farrell and I'm the Flying Salesman. For those of you that don't know, I work for an awesome aviation company out of Wichita, Kansas called Avionics, and this airplane is my company car. I get to travel the country in this airplane, seeing our great customers, and I take you guys along with me as we fly. Because I cover such a wide territory, preparation is a huge part of my flight planning, and we've all been there. We've had the needle centered, we're coming down the glide slope, we get to the decision altitude, and no runway. We have to go missed. And now is not the time to be figuring out the next steps and how we're going to execute that phase of flight. So in this video, we're going to get into how to prepare for a missed approach, some of the key attributes, some of the key aspects that we need to consider when we're going missed, and it'll make it as easy as possible. We're going to talk about how to brief the approach with a missed in mind. I'm also going to share a quick tip that's going to make those first few seconds of a go-around super easy. So the first thing we need to talk about is when to go missed. And FAR 91-175 is the regulation that we're going to look to that gives us the guidance of when to go missed. You must go missed if you reach your decision altitude or your missed approach point and you don't have the runway environment in sight. Also, if you don't have the forward visibility, you will not be able to continue that approach. Lastly, if you're not in a position to make a normal and safe landing, whether that be horizontally or laterally, you must execute a missed approach. And we're going to get more into that lateral separation or that lateral guidance a little bit later on. But most people think of it as diving for the runway, being unsafe or that sort of thing. But you can also pop out of the clouds so offset or so far one side or the other the runway that it makes maneuvering unsafe as well. So you got to keep that in mind. It's both laterally and horizontal. This is a critical point. Just because you see something out the window, that does not constitute the runway environment. You need to make sure that whatever you're seeing is truly part of the airport or runway environment to safely continue that approach. Too many times there have been people that have seen things outside the windshield that they thought was a runway environment, and it may be street lights or other lights below them, and they get themselves into trouble. So make certain of what you're seeing out the windscreen and don't do any drastic maneuvers trying to make it to the runway. It also bears mentioning right here that if ATC tells you to go missed, you must go missed. They have a big picture of what's going on in the airport environment, and sometimes there may be a situation develop that creates an unsafe landing, and they're going to instruct you to go missed. You may have executed a perfect approach, you've broken out well before, now you're in VMC conditions, a vehicle pulls out on the runway, an aircraft taxis across, maybe he takes the runway, and ATC is going to call a go-around, or maybe you have to initiate that go-around and you're going to be executing that missed approach. So that's why it's really important that even on days where the weather, you don't expect it to be that bad, you need to brief the missed approach and you need to be prepared for it. We're gonna treat this like we do our takeoffs. You treat every takeoff and expect a rejected takeoff. For every approach, you're going to expect to go around. The surprise is going to be the landing at the end. You're not going to be surprised by a missed approach, and you're going to brief it and you're going to be prepared for it. The approach briefing is going to be your lifeline to executing the perfect missed approach. The final approach fix is not the time to be figuring out what you're going to do if you have to go missed. If you're like me, you fly the airplane and you're constantly asking yourself what's next. And that's what we definitely want to do when we're prepping and preparing for an instrument approach. So when you receive the ATIS, and it's tell you that the IFR arrivals can expect the RNAV GPS to 1-4, that's going to give you a clue that that's going to be the instrument approach that you need to brief. Or ATC is going to tell you, expect the RNAV GPS to 1-4. So once they tell you, go ahead and get your approach plate pulled up and start that briefing. I'm not going to go through the entire chart briefing process. Bold Method has done a great job and written a fantastic article for how to brief an entire approach plate. I'm going to put a link to that down in the description below. The interesting thing is, when they get down to the last item on their approach plate briefing, it's the missed approach point, and they dedicate 2 sentences to it. Stick with me to the end and learn why you shouldn't gloss over this part of the approach briefing and how it can save the day. When you're briefing the approach, it's really important that you brief it out loud. Even if you're single pilot IFR, say it out loud just like you had a co-pilot with you, so that you know that your brain is engaged and you are concentrating on the elements that you need to make a successful approach. When it comes to the missed approach instructions, you want to start with the briefing. You want to start with your decision altitude or your minimum descent altitude. And with ForeFlight, it's really easy. We can annotate right on the chart what the decision altitude or the minimum descent altitude is. For the RNAV GPS 14 into Shreveport downtown, it's 429 feet for the approach. So you can put 429 right there on the screen so you can see it. If you're doing the LNAV, which is the lateral guidance only, it's 680 feet. So we can clear that, clear annotations, and we can write 680 really big. That way we know that 680 feet is our minimum descent altitude for a non-precision approach into Shreveport downtown. The other thing that I like to do is I like to go ahead and put my approach speed in there. So we're going to level off 680 feet. It's going to be at 90 knots. Go ahead and put that on the approach plate. That way it gives you the opportunity to know that 680 feet, 90 knots, and you can maintain a stabilized approach to the visual descent point. So we got 680, we've got 90 knots. The other thing that we want to annotate on there are the rest of the missed approach instructions. Missed approach is climb to 3,000, direct Gokti on a track of 135 to Elm Grove, Vortac, and hold. It's going to be direct 3,000, 135. Now we have our notes right there on the screen in big bold letters to tell us how to execute this missed approach. And we get that from the briefing tab of the missed approach on our approach plate. When we write that down, it helps solidify in our mind what those missed approach instructions are. As you're coming in, ATC may give you different instructions. So it's going to be 680 at 90 knots, and then it's going to be runway heading. So you just make that annotation on the chart, runway heading 140. One of the things you need to have solidified in your mind is if the missed approach calls for a turn, you need to make sure you're clear on when to start that turn. Some are climb to 3,000, which means you climb straight out till you hit 3,000 feet. Some are a climbing turn. You need to have it clear in your mind when exactly to begin that turn. And when I get to my pro tip in just a minute, I'm going to share with you an easy way to make sure the airplane and you are ready for that turn. When you're briefing the approach, make sure you fully understand what your nav sources are going to be. If you're shooting an ILS, you might want your number 2 programmed for GPS. That gives you, number 1, a course backup that is backed up with GPS, and number 2, it can help you transition to the missed approach easier if you're flying the published missed approach. Also, if you're shooting a GPS approach into an airport and you expect you might have to go missed, having the VOR loaded that is part of the VOR approach for the next approach is also a good tip and a way to use your avionics systems to be prepared in the event that you have a missed approach. Another thing that you want to figure out when you're briefing the approach is your holding pattern. The hold is published, so go ahead and figure out what your entry is going to be now while you're briefing the approach. Usually you've got a few minutes while you're still with approach control and you're coming in to make that approach that you take a breath and go ahead and figure out your entry into your holding pattern, and that way you're not en route to your holding pattern, transitioning from climb to cruise and all those machinations. You can be ready and prepared and it's already briefed. The other thing you can do is you can use the annotation on the ForeFlight to go ahead and write that in, direct, parallel, or teardrop, so you already know what you're going to need to do to make that entry into that holding pattern. Now, for those of us with GPS systems, those entries are already programmed in, and that makes it really nice and makes it convenient for us to be able to see and understand what we need to do to make that entry. Then the last thing we need to do, are there any special notes about the go around? Is there a particular climb gradient? Are there any particular obstacles that we have to be aware of? Make sure that there aren't any extenuating circumstances that you need to be aware of if you go missed approach. I know there's one particular approach in Utah that I have shot in the past that has a pretty steep climb gradient, and you're already at a high altitude, so you have to make sure that your airplane is able to climb in those nautical miles, or excuse me, the feet per nautical mile, not feet per minute, but feet per nautical mile, to have that obstruction clearance that you need. On a non-precision approach, in the ideal world, you're going to reach your minimum descent altitude before you reach the missed approach point. If it becomes necessary that you have to go around before you reach your missed approach point, you can start your climb, but you cannot start your turn until you hit that missed approach point. This actually happened to me on an approach, IMC, going into Alexandria, Louisiana, and I had a landing gear issue. So I hit the final approach fix, my landing gear didn't come down, I pulled it up, got it back up, I dropped it again, it still didn't extend correctly, and I had to go missed. So at that point in time, I stopped the ILS, I leveled off at the altitude I was at, and continued inbound until I got to the missed approach point. Another important aspect that you need to consider in your approach briefing is what you're going to do when you go missed. We're going to get into that a little deeper in just a minute, but you need to have it in your mind. Are you going to your alternate? Are you going to shoot another approach? But you need to have that solidified in your mind what your next course of action is if you go missed approach in your IMC. Having this decision clear in your mind now is going to reduce stress and reduce your workload after you've gone missed. Like we said before, you need to be expecting to go missed and be surprised if you have a successful landing. Doing a proper approach briefing builds bandwidth in your brain and reduces stress, so go over it until it's boring, until you have all the details nailed, you have all the notes on your iPad or on your notepad that you need to make a successful approach. We've covered why you should go around based on the FARs. We've covered the when you should go around based on briefing the approach plate. Now we're going to talk about how you go missed approach and operate the airplane during this sequence of flight. A really great flight instructor of mine, Richard Rainey, gave me this tip many years ago, and I've used it on every go around that I've executed ever since. Once you hit the missed approach point, I want you to remember this: cram it, climb it, clean it, cool it, call it, and crank it. We're going to go through each one of these 6 C's, and it's going to help you when you shoot your next instrument approach and you have to go missed. So the very first one is cram it. In the Cessna 210, I set the RPM at 2,500 RPMs when I hit the final approach fix. So when it's time to go around, I push the throttle all the way to the firewall, full throttle, to start that climb. Now that's going to immediately help the nose rise, and I'm going to pitch and trim the airplane for a positive climb angle. For me, I'm looking at about 3 to 5 degrees, but if you simply on your attitude indicator just get that airplane indice about 1 line width above the horizon, that's going to give you a good starting point for establishing your climb. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to clean it. In the Cessna 210, a retract airplane, you want to get that gear up once you've established a positive rate. So by the time that we have put the power full forward and we have pitched the nose just positive above the horizon, the airplane is going to start climbing, and you should see your VSI starting to move and trend in the positive. Once you recognize that, go ahead and pull the gear handle up and get that gear up. The Cessna 210, we have 10 degrees of flaps. I'm going to leave that in for right now because it will just help me with my positive rate and my climb. So you're going to cram it, you're going to climb it, and you're going to clean it. The next thing you need to do is cool. We have a 310 horsepower turbocharged engine. We need to get the cowl flaps open to get that air moving through it to keep the engine nice and cool. The next on the list is call it. We're going to tell ATC that we've gone missed approach. 6048 November, missed approach, RNAV GPS 14. That tells you who you are, and that tells That tells them who you are and it tells them where you are so that they can know and understand what the next step in the process is. The very last one is crank it. And that is to turn your heading bug to the desired heading if you need to make a turn. If you're flying straight out, then your heading bug is going to stay centered up and you're going to keep flying straight out until that changes. But crank it is the last C that helps you remember of when and where to start that turn. Now, it's really important to state you do not have to rush through these and do all of these at the same time. I want you to be very methodical about this. Even do some chair flying or sit in your airplane when the airplane's not running and go through this. Cram it, climb it, clean it, cool it, call it, crank it. Now, the general rule of thumb is that even in an approach that has a climbing turn as part of a missed approach, ATC wants you to start that turn within the environment of the airport. So if you've got a mile-long runway that you're coming into and you go approach, they want you to start that turn somewhere in that next mile. So give yourself some time. This only takes a few seconds. Get this all taken care of before you start that turn. You want the airplane to be clean and established in a nice climb before you start that turn. These don't have to be all done at the same time. Be methodical, take a deep breath, and go through each one individually. It's really important that in an instance where you have a climbing right turn, climbing left turn, that you don't start that turn immediately. Give the airplane an opportunity to stabilize in a climb and be in a steady state so that the transition is very smooth into that turn. In that sequence, cram it, climb it, clean it, cool it, call it, crank it. It's really important that in that call it, you use that time to allow the airplane to establish itself in the climb and be in that steady state of flight. By that point in time, you've already transitioned from an attitude-based scan for your attitude and your climb to airspeed. You've introduced that in now. So now you're getting your airspeed dialed in for the optimum climb for your airplane. And that's going to further allow the airplane to be in a steady state. What I'm saying is, don't hit your decision altitude or your missed approach point and immediately crank the airplane over into some aggressive maneuver or even minor maneuvers. The NTSB records are full of pilots who've had trouble in go-arounds in VFR conditions. Now you're executing what amounts to a go-around in IMC. So make sure that you do everything slow and deliberate and have the airplane ready for that turn when the time comes. It's generally accepted that that turn needs to start inside the boundaries of the airport. So a lot of runways, you can just kind of categorize them as being close to a mile. So you've got 1 mile to get the airplane established in climb and ready for that turn. So make sure you go through these C's very methodically. So when you get to the crank it, the airplane is in a steady state of flight and transitioning to that turn is not an issue. Depending on the performance of your aircraft, you may reach the altitude before you finish the turn, or you may finish the turn before you reach the altitude. That's not really critical. What is critical is the reason why they have these turns is there's most likely an obstacle that prevents you from flying straight out away from the airport. So you need to get the airplane turned in the direction away from the obstacle, and then you can finish your climb based on the performance of the airplane. If you're using an autopilot, a flight director, or a GPS, there's some things that you need to be aware of to avoid getting yourself in a trap. First and foremost, when you go missed approach, the Garmin GPS systems, they go into suspend mode, and you have to take them out of suspend mode to allow the GPS to sequence to the missed approach. And that's going to be the published missed approach. So if you've been given missed approach instructions that aren't the same, you need to make sure that you fly the missed approach instructions that you were assigned by ATC. For the 210 and the autopilot that we have, when we go missed, we're going to disconnect the autopilot and we're going to be hand flying. So you need to be prepared to transition from autopilot to hand flying. And if you want to go back to autopilot at some point, you need to train for that to be able to set your autopilot up to be able to fly what you intend it to fly. Don't turn on your autopilot and let it be programmed to the next waypoint and cause a problem not complying with ATC instruction because it's turning to a published missed when you're supposed to be flying straight out. So you need to know your avionics systems, and you need to know how they work under pressure in IMC conditions. That's why training all this is very important with an instructor or a safety pilot, so that you can know and understand how to operate these avionics. Some of the common mistakes that you're going to run into is you forgot to brief the missed approach. Maybe you're out shooting instrument approaches under the hood, you've got a safety pilot, and you're expecting to land this time around. You've been working hard, but this is the time when an airplane pops out on the runway and you have to go around. You need to be prepared for this no matter what. Remember, we're preparing for a missed approach in every instance and surprised by the landing. So don't allow yourself to get behind the airplane because you didn't brief the approach. Another common trap that we get into, our mind gets fixated on the missed approach and we start that turn too early. Make sure you hit the decision altitude or you reach the missed approach point before you start your turn, and also make sure that the airplane is stabilized before you begin that turn. Make sure your nav sources are set, that your VOR localizer has been switched to GPS or GPS has been switched to VOR localizer. Whatever your avionics need to be set on, you need to make sure that they're set and they're ready to go when you need them. Another trap that pilots fall into when they're going missed is not managing airspeed. Make sure that's introduced into your scan, and make sure you maintain the proper airspeed so you don't get too low and too slow in your airplane. A big one that we see too often is you've flown an approach, you've flown it poorly, you're misaligned with the runway, you're too high, and you're trying to force the airplane onto the runway. You see the runway environment, you've got it in sight, but now you're in a situation where you're trying to force the airplane down on the runway. So make sure you have a stabilized approach and you can transition from that approach to landing. If you don't have that, you have to execute that missed approach that hopefully that you briefed and you're prepared for, so that you can come back around and get it right. This is a big one, and I want all of you to remember this. You cannot rely on autopilots and automation to get you out of trouble on these instrument approaches and missed approaches. If you're not capable of hand flying the entire flight, IMC, if it's a 4-hour flight, hard IFR, you have to be capable and have the mental capacity to fly that flight. If you can't do it by hand flying the entire thing, you don't need to blast off and expect your autopilot to work 100% of the time. You need to be prepared for that autopilot to fail, and you need to be prepared to hand fly. So do not rely on automation to execute these tasks for you. You have to be capable of doing this on your own. Here's where the last step of the missed approach briefing is really going to come into play. You've gone missed, you successfully and methodically gone through the 6 C's of a missed approach. Now you're going to get handed over to approach control. They're going to say something like this: 6048 November, roger, fly runway heading, climb maintain 3000, direct ZOROD and hold say intentions. You need to be prepared for that say intentions part, and that's where planning for it back on the approach plate briefing is going to come into play here. You don't want to be scrambling, and you don't want to be trying to figure out what you're going to do next. There's a few things you need to assess as to whether or not you're going to be able to come back around and shoot the same approach again. Do you really expect the weather to be that much better? If you shot the perfect approach to minimums and didn't pop out, what's going to change in the next 10 to 15 minutes that's going to make it more likely that you're going to get in? Was the approach that you shot not a very good approach? Did you not actually make it to decision altitude? Or perhaps you arrived at your missed approach point too high? You can take that into consideration as to whether or not you're going to shoot another approach into the same airport. Do you have the fuel and the time and the composure? Are you mentally prepared to come back around and shoot that approach into the same airport? After you've shot and gone missed, the next approach you need to shoot, you need to set yourself up for the greatest chance of success. You need to find the easiest approach to an airport that's going to get you in. Get their ITIS comes into play and is a huge factor that can lead you down the road of disaster if you allow it. At this point in time, you've gone to your destination, you didn't make it in there, you need to be considering, are you going to your alternate? Is there another airport nearby that has better weather than even your alternate? You need to look for the best course of action for you and your airplane and your passengers to make sure you make the safest decision. According to pilotworkshops.com, many pilots have dug themselves into a hole by attempting a second and third approach. Many pilots that I have discussed this with say the exact same thing. If they shoot an instrument approach into an airport at minimums, they only give themselves one approach. They go somewhere else. So following the advice of wise flight instructors, of experienced pilot, tells me that you get one chance at a good approach into an airport, and then you need to go to your alternate. And certainly don't get yourself into the trap of, I'll shoot the approach this time and just go just a little bit lower, because that is a definite recipe for disaster. Use good aeronautical decision making. Consider your fuel, consider the safety of your passengers, and remember the environment that you're working in. Be the PIC, and just because it's filed doesn't mean that has to be your destination. Don't forget, missed approaches are not a surprise. They're part of the plan. Brief them, fly them, and respect them, and use them to help you get home safely. I appreciate you guys coming along. It's always a pleasure having you on board, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.